Before we begin, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Whether it's late at night or early morning, you're in the right place. This is a journey through 4,000 years of hidden beliefs, secret gatherings, and the human need to belong to something greater. There's no need to rush through this. Settle in, get comfortable, and forget about time for a while. Throughout human history, people have gathered in the shadows, not always for dark purposes, though darkness often followed. Sometimes they sought wisdom that the world wasn't ready to hear. Sometimes they craved power that society wouldn't grant them openly. And sometimes they simply wanted to feel chosen, special, part of something that separated them from the ordinary masses walking in daylight. The word cult carries weight now, but it wasn't always so loaded. In ancient Rome, a cultus was simply a system of religious worship. Every god had their cult, every temple its devotees. But certain groups took their devotion further, wrapping their practices in secrecy, demanding oaths of silence, creating hierarchies of knowledge where each level brought you closer to some ultimate truth. These weren't always sinister. Many were beautiful in their way, but beauty and danger often share the same face. We'll move through time slowly, examining these groups not as monsters or saints, but as humans doing what humans do, searching for meaning, building communities, and occasionally losing themselves in the process. Some of these stories are well known, others have been buried for good reason, but all of them tell us something about the strange machinery of belief and what happens when people decide the rules everyone else follows don't apply to them. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 2000 BCE, the priests of certain temples began to separate themselves from ordinary worship. The general public could come to the temple, make their offerings, say their prayers, but behind the main sanctuary, deeper chambers existed. Only the initiated entered there. The cult of Ishtar, goddess of love and war, maintained these inner circles across multiple cities. The priests who served in these inner sanctums underwent years of training. They learned sacred languages that common people couldn't speak. They memorized rituals that took hours to perform correctly. One wrong word, one gesture out of sequence, and the entire ceremony had to begin again. The precision was exhausting, but precision was the point. It separated them from the masses who simply showed up, said a quick prayer, and went home. What happened in those inner chambers? The historical record gives us fragments. There were ecstatic dances that lasted until dancers collapsed. There were substances burned that produced visions. The smoke from certain resins, when inhaled in enclosed spaces, could alter consciousness in predictable ways. The priests knew this. They used it. When a young initiate, dizzy from fasting and breathing sacred smoke, saw visions of the goddess, was that divine intervention or careful manipulation? The priest probably didn't make that distinction. The experience was real. That's what mattered. These early cult practices established patterns that would repeat for millennia. The separation of initiates from non-initiates, the levels of secret knowledge, the idea that suffering or difficulty in joining made membership more valuable. If anyone could join freely, why would it mean anything? But if you had to fast for weeks, memorize hundreds of prayers, undergo painful oracles, then belonging meant you'd achieved something. You'd been transformed. The cult of Ishtar wasn't unique. Throughout the ancient Near East, temple cults operated on similar principles. In Egypt, the cult of Isis maintained mysteries that only the initiated could witness. These weren't neighborhood prayer groups. They were exclusive organizations that wielded significant political power. The high priests of major temples often came from noble families. Their religious authority reinforced their social position. Keep the secrets, maintain the hierarchy, and everyone in power benefits. But not every ancient cult served the establishment. Some rose in direct opposition to it. In Greece, around the 6th century BCE, the cult of Dionysus spread among people who had no power in traditional society. Women especially. In a culture that largely confined women to domestic spaces, the Dionysian mysteries offered something revolutionary. The chance to leave home, gather in the mountains, dance wildly, and worship a god who represented ecstasy and liberation. The rituals were shocking to outsiders. Women called maenads would spend nights in the wilderness, working themselves into ecstatic states through dance and music. They reportedly tore apart animals with their bare hands during these frenzies. Whether this actually happened or whether it was propaganda from those who feared female autonomy is debated. But the anxiety was real. The cult threatened social order, because it gave women a space where men's rules didn't apply. The interesting thing about the Dionysian cult is that it eventually became respectable. Athens, that beacon of classical civilization, officially recognized the mysteries of Dionysus. The god was domesticated, brought into the civic pantheon. What had been transgressive became tradition. This pattern repeats throughout history. A cult emerges, threatens the establishment, and if it survives long enough, either gets crushed or gets absorbed. Christianity followed this exact trajectory, moving from persecuted cult to state religion in just a few centuries, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. In the classical world, one cult stood above others in prestige and longevity, the Eleusinian Mysteries. For nearly 2,000 years, from about 1500 BCE until 392 CE, initiates travelled to Eleusis, a small city near Athens, to participate in secret rites that promised transformation. The remarkable thing is how well they kept their secrets. We know initiates came from across the Mediterranean world. We know the ceremonies lasted 9 days. We know they involved a journey, fasting, sacred drinks, and a final revelation in the Telesterion, the Great Hall of Mysteries. What we don't know is what they actually saw. The penalty for revealing the mysteries was death, and people took that seriously. For 2 millennia, thousands upon thousands of people experienced whatever happened in that hall, and almost no one talked. The few hints we have suggest there was something shown, some sacred object or vision revealed at the climax of the ceremony. Many scholars believe a psychedelic substance was involved, possibly ergot, a grain fungus that contains compounds similar to LSD. The sacred drink, the kykeon, made from barley, might have been contaminated with ergot deliberately. If this is true, it changes how we understand the mysteries. We're not talking about theatre or metaphor. We're talking about actual use altered states of consciousness, induced chemically and ritualized carefully. The initiates weren't just told that death wasn't the end. They experienced something that convinced them personally. That's far more powerful than any sermon. The cult's influence was enormous. Plato was initiated, Aristotle, Marcus Aurelius. These weren't gullible peasants seeking comfort. These were some of the most intelligent people of their age, and they came away from Eleusis transformed. The philosopher Cicero wrote that the mysteries made life worth living and gave people better hopes for death. That's quite an endorsement. The mysteries ended when the Christian Roman Emperor Theodosius I banned all pagan cults in 392 CE. The temple at Eleusis was destroyed, the sacred objects were lost or hidden, and the secret that thousands of people had kept for centuries died with the last initiates. We can reconstruct the framework of the ceremonies, but the core experience is gone. In a way, that's fitting. Some things remain secret even after the cult that kept them disappears. As Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, it faced a problem. It was, by definition, exclusive. You had to believe specific things, perform specific rituals, follow specific rules. But Christianity also claimed to be universal, open to anyone. This created tension. How do you be both exclusive and universal? The answer was to create inner circles within the religion itself. Esoteric Christian groups emerged almost immediately, promising deeper truths than what the ordinary faithful received. Gnosticism flowered in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, offering a very different version of Christianity than what would become Orthodox. The Gnostics taught that the material world was created by a false god, an ignorant demiurge, and that the true divine existed beyond it. Christ came not to save us from sin, but to teach us the secret knowledge, the gnosis, that would free us from the prison of matter. This was sophisticated stuff, drawing on Greek philosophy and Near Eastern mysticism. It wasn't for everyone. Gnostic groups operated in secrecy because they had to. The emerging Orthodox Church viewed them as heretics and persecuted them accordingly. Gnostic texts were burned. Gnostic leaders were executed or exiled. What we know about Gnosticism comes largely from its enemies until 1945, when a collection of Gnostic texts was discovered buried in Egypt at Nag Hammadi. These texts revealed a rich, complex theology that mainstream Christianity had tried to erase. The Gospel of Thomas, found at Nag Hammadi, contains sayings attributed to Jesus that don't appear in the canonical Gospels. Some are familiar, others strange and cryptic. The text emphasizes direct knowledge of the divine rather than faith in doctrine. It's easy to see why the Orthodox Church found this threatening. If people can access divine truth directly, who needs priests and bishops? The The entire hierarchy becomes unnecessary, but Gnosticism failed, or appeared to. It was crushed by Orthodox Christianity in the Roman Empire. Yet its ideas never quite died. They kept resurfacing in different forms, different movements, across the centuries. Medieval heresies like the Cathars taught dualistic cosmologies remarkably similar to ancient Gnostic thought. Were they direct descendants or independent rediscoveries? Hard to say. Some ideas are so compelling they keep being reinvented. In the 7th century, a new religion exploded out of Arabia that would reshape the world: Islam. Like Christianity before it, Islam claimed to be the final revelation, open to all who submitted to God's will, and like Christianity, it immediately began spawning esoteric sects that claimed deeper knowledge than the ordinary faithful possessed. The most significant of these were the Ismailis, a Shia Muslim sect that developed an elaborate hierarchical system of initiation. At the bottom were regular believers who followed the outward laws of Islam. But as you climbed the ranks of initiation, you learned that these outward laws were merely symbols pointing to deeper truths. At the highest levels, initiates were taught that religious laws were provisional, that the ultimate truth transcended all specific religions. This was dangerous knowledge. If taken the wrong way, it could justify abandoning Islamic law entirely. The Ismailis wielded significant power during the medieval period. They controlled territories, built castles, trained devoted followers who would carry out assassinations of political enemies. The English word assassin comes from hashishin, a name applied to one branch of the Ismailis. Later European writers claimed these assassins were drugged with hashish to make them fearless, hence the name. This is probably fiction, part of the myth-making that surrounded them. But the assassinations were real enough. The Nizari Ismailis, based in mountain fortresses in Persia and Syria, perfected political assassination as a tool. Their leader, known to Europeans as the Old Man of the Mountain, commanded absolute loyalty from his followers. If he ordered someone to jump from a castle wall to their death, they jumped. This wasn't mind control in any mystical sense. It was the result of years of careful indoctrination and a belief system that made martyrdom the highest honour. The Crusaders encountered these Ismaili fortresses and were both fascinated and terrified. Christian knights couldn't understand this level of devotion. Their own forces were motivated by promises of plunder and salvation, but these Muslims seemed to welcome death itself. The Europeans brought stories back about paradise gardens, where the assassins were shown visions of heaven and promised they'd return there after completing their missions. Again, this is probably legend. The reality was likely more mundane: dedicated believers who thought they were serving God. The Mongols eventually destroyed most of the Nizari fortresses in the 13th century, scattering the sect. But Ismaili communities survived and still exist today. Modern Ismailis are generally peaceful and prosperous, led by the Aga Khan. The assassin fortresses are ruins. But for a couple centuries this cult wielded power disproportionate to its size through careful organisation, absolute devotion, and strategic violence. Medieval Europe had its own flowering of secret religious movements, most of them crushed brutally by the Catholic Church. The Cathars of southern France represented one of the most successful heretical movements before they were exterminated. Emerging in the 12th century, the Cathars taught a dualistic theology similar to ancient Gnosticism. The material world was evil, created by an evil god. The spirit was good, and came from a good god. Salvation meant freeing the spirit from matter. This theology had radical implications. If matter is evil, then the body is a prison. Marriage and procreation just create more prisons for more souls. The Catha Perfecti, their elite-initiated class, practiced complete celibacy and extreme asceticism. They ate no meat, milk, or eggs, since these came from animal reproduction. They owned nothing. They wandered from town to town, preaching and performing rituals for believers. Ordinary Cathars didn't have to live this way. Only the Perfecti took the full vows. Regular believers could marry, own property, eat what they wanted. They simply had to receive the consolamentum, the main Cathar sacrament, before death to ensure their salvation. This two-tier system made the religion manageable. Most people lived normally and became Perfecti only when they were dying. The Catholic Church viewed the Cathars as an existential threat. Catharism was spreading rapidly across southern France and into Italy. Entire towns converted. Some estimates suggest a third of the population in parts of Languedoc were Cathar sympathizers. The church tried preaching against them, sending in Dominican and Franciscan friars to debate the Cathars publicly. It didn't work. The Cathars were better debaters and lived more virtuously than most Catholic clergy. Actions speak louder than words, and the contrast was stark, so the church took more direct action. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars. This wasn't a crusade to the Holy Land against Muslims, this was a crusade against Christians in France, a holy war on European soil. The Crusaders were promised the same spiritual rewards as if they'd fought in Jerusalem, plus they could keep any land they conquered. It was both holy war and land grab. The crusade was vicious. When the Crusaders captured the town of Béziers in 1209, they massacred the entire population, somewhere between 7,000 and 20,000 people, Catholics and Cathars alike. The papal legate supposedly said, "Kill them all, God will know his own." Whether he actually said this is disputed, but it captures the spirit of the campaign. This wasn't about conversion, it was about extermination. The crusade lasted decades. The Cathars held out in mountain fortresses. The siege of Montségur in 1244 became legendary. About 500 people held the fortress for 10 months against a massive army. When they finally surrendered, more than 200 perfectors chose to be burned alive rather than renounce their faith. They walked into the flames singing hymns. By the end of the 13th century, Catharism was effectively destroyed. The last perfecti were hunted down by the Inquisition. The Inquisition itself was created largely to root out remaining Cathars. The organisation that would terrorise Europe for centuries began as an anti-Cathar operation. The church won, but it took mass slaughter and decades of persecution, and even then, Cathar beliefs persisted underground, occasionally surfacing in later heresies. The Knights Templar began as a legitimate military religious order during the Crusades, but ended as the most famous cult destroyed by political conspiracy. Founded around 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land, the Templars became enormously wealthy and powerful over the next 2 centuries. They developed an early form of banking, allowing pilgrims to deposit money in Europe and withdraw it in Jerusalem. They owned castles, estates, and whole fleets of ships. They answered only to the Pope, not to any king. This independence made them dangerous. King Philip IV of France owed the Templars a fortune and saw them as a threat to royal authority. So on Friday, October the 13th, 1307, he ordered the arrest of every Templar in France. Dozens of knights were seized simultaneously. The charges were spectacular: heresy, idol worship, obscene rituals, denying Christ, spitting on the cross. The confessions, extracted through extended persuasion, described initiation ceremonies where new members had to deny Christ 3 times and spit on a crucifix. How much of this was true? Probably very little. The confessions were coerced, and the charges served Philip's political interests too perfectly to be credible. But some elements might have been real. The Templars did operate in secrecy. Their initiation ceremonies were closed to outsiders. They developed their own internal culture during decades in the East. It's possible some unorthodox practices crept in, though probably nothing as dramatic as the charges suggested. The Templars were systematically destroyed. In 1312, Pope Clement V officially dissolved the order. The Grand Master Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake in 1314. Legend says he cursed King Philip and Pope Clement from the flames, and both did die within the year. Coincidence, but a dramatic one. The Templar destruction created a template for destroying powerful organisations through accusations of secret heresy. It also created a legend. Because the Templars fell so dramatically and suddenly, rumours spread that they'd possess secret knowledge, hidden treasures, mystical powers. None of this was true, but the legend grew over centuries. By the 18th century, various groups were claiming descent from the Templars and preserving their supposed secrets. Modern occult orders still invoke Templar symbolism, connecting themselves to a martyred brotherhood of warrior mystics. The real Templars were soldier bankers. The legendary Templars are far more interesting. As we move into the Renaissance, secret societies begin to take new forms. The breakdown of feudalism, the rise of cities, the spread of printing, all these created conditions for new kinds of organisations. Knowledge was no longer locked in monasteries. Books circulated, ideas spread. People with shared interest could find each other across distances. Alchemy emerged as a semi-secret practice during this period. Alchemists sought to transform base metals into gold, certainly, but that was never the whole story. The physical transformation of metals symbolized spiritual transformation. The alchemist working in his laboratory was simultaneously working on himself, purifying his soul as he purified substances in his vessels. The process took years of study and practice. The texts were deliberately obscure, written in code filled with symbolic imagery. Only the initiated could understand them. The secrecy served multiple purposes. Alchemists wanted to protect their discoveries from rivals. They also wanted to avoid persecution from church or state. The line between alchemy and heresy was thin. Claiming you could transform matter implied you understood the fundamental nature of creation, which was getting close to claiming godlike knowledge. Safer to work quietly and share findings only with those who'd proven themselves worthy. Alchemical societies formed across Europe, loose networks of practitioners who corresponded and occasionally met. They developed recognition signs so members could identify each other. They used coded language in letters in case correspondence was intercepted. Much of this seems paranoid now, but it wasn't. The Inquisition really did investigate suspected alchemists. Princes really did imprison alchemists who failed to produce gold. The secrecy was protective. Alchemy declined as modern chemistry emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries, but its spiritual aspects migrated into other movements. Rosicrucianism, which appeared in the early 1600s, blended alchemical symbolism with Christian mysticism and utopian social ideas. The Rosicrucian manifestos, published anonymously in Germany, described a secret brotherhood of enlightened adepts working to transform society through hidden knowledge. Were the Rosicrucians real? Probably not. At least not in the form the manifestos described. They seem to have been a literary creation, possibly a Protestant allegory, or an elaborate hoax, but it didn't matter. People believed they were real. Soon actual groups formed claiming to be Rosicrucians or to have contact with the secret brotherhood. The fiction became real through people's desire for it to be real. This pattern repeats constantly in cult history. Someone creates a story about a secret society with ancient wisdom. The story spreads. Believers form actual groups based on the fictional society. Eventually, the real groups become more significant than the fictional inspiration. The Rosicrucian story inspired actual occult orders that exist today. The imaginary became concrete. The 18th century saw the rise of Freemasonry, the most successful and enduring secret society in Western history. The Freemasons emerged from medieval stonemasons' guilds, which had secret recognition signs and passwords to protect their professional knowledge. As actual stonemasonry declined, these lodges began accepting non-masons as members, transforming from professional guilds into philosophical societies. Freemasonry offered something appealing, a structured system of moral and spiritual development through ritual and symbolism. Members progressed through degrees, each revealing more of the lodge's symbolic teachings. The rituals drew on biblical stories, particularly the building of Solomon's temple, mixing them with Enlightenment ideals of reason and brotherhood. It was exclusive enough to be prestigious, but open enough to attract members from various social classes. The secrecy was part of the appeal. Freemasons couldn't discuss what happened in lodge meetings with outsiders. They used special handshakes to identify fellow members. They had passwords and signs. This created an insider-outsider dynamic that made membership valuable. You weren't just joining a club, you were being initiated into mysteries. Freemasonry spread rapidly across Europe and into the American colonies. Many founding fathers were Freemasons: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere. The Declaration of Independence's language about equality and natural rights resonated with Masonic ideals. Some historians argue Freemasonry was crucial to spreading Enlightenment ideas beyond intellectual circles, translating them into ritual and symbol that ordinary people could grasp. But Freemasonry's secrecy also made it suspect. The Catholic Church condemned it repeatedly. Conspiracy theories flourished. Anti-Masonic movements emerged, particularly in America in the 1820s and 30s, claiming the Freemasons controlled politics and business through secret networks. The murder of William Morgan in 1826, a Freemason who threatened to reveal the order's secrets, sparked an anti-Masonic political movement that briefly became a third party. The Morgan affair is worth examining. Morgan was an unemployed stonemason in upstate New York who decided to publish a book exposing Masonic rituals. Before the book could be printed, he was arrested on dubious charges, then kidnapped from jail by a group of Freemasons. He disappeared and was never seen again. A body found in the Niagara River was identified as Morgan, though the identification was questionable. The incident confirmed every anti-Masonic suspicion. Here was proof that Freemasons would engage in violence to protect their secrets, that they operated above the law, that they protected each other regardless of guilt. The political fallout was significant. Anti-Masonic candidates won elections across New York and neighboring states. Masonic membership plummeted. The order had to publicly defend itself, which was difficult given their vow of secrecy. But Freemasonry survived and eventually rebuilt. By the late 19th century, it was again prestigious to be a Freemason. The organization had weathered the storm by opening up slightly, publishing general information about its structure while keeping specific rituals secret. It also emphasized its charitable work, its support for widows and orphans, its role in building communities. The sinister secret society became the local lodge sponsoring the town parade. While mainstream Freemasonry became domesticated, its symbolism and structure inspired more radical groups. The Illuminati, founded in Bavaria in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, tried to create a more revolutionary organization. Weishaupt was a law professor frustrated with the backwardness of Bavarian society. He envisioned a secret society that would infiltrate positions of power and gradually steer society toward Enlightenment ideals. The Illuminati adopted Masonic-style degrees and initiation rituals, but with a more explicitly political agenda. Members were to recruit influential people, gain their trust, and slowly convert them to the Illuminati's rationalist anti-clerical worldview. The ultimate goal was a world governed by reason rather than superstition, by merit rather than inherited privilege. It was ambitious and, given the political climate of late 18th century Europe, incredibly dangerous. The order grew quickly, attracting intellectuals, nobles, and even some members of ruling families. At its peak, it may have had several thousand members across Germany and neighbouring countries. But it also attracted attention. Conservative forces in Bavaria, particularly the Catholic Church and the aristocracy, viewed the Illuminati as a dire threat. In 1785, the Bavarian government banned all secret societies and began a crackdown. The suppression was thorough. Illuminati leaders fled into exile. Members were interrogated, documents were seized and published to demonstrate the order's subversive nature. By 1787, the Illuminati was effectively destroyed. It had existed for barely a decade. But like the Templars before them, the Illuminati's destruction ensured their immortality in conspiracy theory. Because the Bavarian government published seized Illuminati documents, people could read about their organizational structure and goals. Conservative writers seized on this material to argue that the French Revolution, which erupted a few years later, was orchestrated by the Illuminati as part of their plan to destroy monarchy and religion. Never mind that the order had been dismantled years before the revolution. The conspiracy theory was too useful to abandon. The Illuminati myth grew over the next 2 centuries. Every major political upheaval was attributed to their hidden influence. The Illuminati supposedly controlled Freemasonry, which controlled governments, which controlled everything. By the 20th century, the Illuminati had become the archetypal shadowy cabal pulling strings behind the scenes. The reality, a small group of German intellectuals who got crushed by the state after 10 years, couldn't compete with the myth. The 19th century saw an explosion of occult societies, particularly in France and England. Spiritualism became fashionable after the Fox sisters in America claimed to communicate with spirits in 1848. Seances became social events, mediums were celebrities. Alongside this spiritualist movement, more structured occult orders formed claiming to teach practical magic. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in London in 1888, became the most influential magical order in the English-speaking world. It drew on Kabbalah, alchemy, tarot, astrology, and ceremonial magic traditions, synthesizing them into a comprehensive system of spiritual development. Members progressed through 10 degrees, each requiring study and examinations, gradually receiving instruction in more complex magical operations. The Golden Dawn attracted an impressive roster of members: the poet W.B. Yeats, the actress Florence Farr, the horror writer Arthur Machen. These weren't fringe characters, they were cultural figures of significance. What drew them to ceremonial magic? For Yeats, it offered a way to experience the spiritual truths he felt modern rationalism had lost. For others, it was about personal power, the idea that you could shape reality through will and ritual. The Order claimed to be in contact with secret chiefs, discarnate beings who guided the Order's development. Whether anyone actually believed this or whether it was a useful fiction is unclear. The leaders certainly acted as if the secret chiefs were real, receiving messages from them and passing on instructions to members. This added an element of mystery and authority. You weren't just studying from books, you were receiving transmission from higher beings through the Order's chiefs. But human nature being what it is, the Golden Dawn collapsed into factional disputes within a few decades. Samuel Liddell Mathers, one of the founders, became increasingly autocratic, claiming exclusive contact with the secret chiefs. Other members disputed his authority. Scandals erupted. The Order splintered into competing factions, each claiming to be the true inheritors of the original teachings. One of those factions was led by Aleister Crowley, perhaps the most famous occultist of the 20th century. Crowley had joined the Golden Dawn in 1898 and advanced rapidly through the degrees. He was brilliant, dedicated, and completely uninterested in other people's rules. When the Order split, Crowley eventually went his own way, founding his own magical system based on what he claimed was a revelation from a discarnate intelligence in Cairo in 1904. Crowley called his system Thelema, from the Greek word for will. Its central teaching was simple: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This wasn't license for random hedonism, though Crowley certainly indulged in plenty of that. It meant discovering your true will, your deepest purpose, and following it absolutely regardless of social convention or traditional morality. Thelema required intense magical training and practice. Crowley published the techniques openly in books and journals, breaking with the tradition of secrecy. Anyone could learn the methods, but actually doing the work was difficult and dangerous. Crowley described magical operations that involved marathon ritual sessions, intensive meditation, extreme states of consciousness, and practices that could destabilize unprepared practitioners. Crowley founded the AA, a magical order organized around individual study rather than lodge meetings. Students worked with personal instructors, progressing through grades as they mastered specific practices. Later, he became involved with the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, a German order that combined Masonic-style degrees with sexual magic techniques. Crowley took over the OTO's British branch and rewrote its rituals to align with Thelema. The sexual magic component made Crowley notorious. He taught that sexual energy could be harnessed for magical purposes, that certain practices could generate intense psychic states, useful for manifesting will. Conservative society was scandalized, which Crowley enjoyed enormously. He cultivated a reputation as the wickedest man in the world, and the tabloids obliged him with sensational stories about his activities. How much of Crowley's magic actually worked? That depends on what worked means. He certainly had profound experiences during his practices. Whether these came from contacting supernatural entities or from altered states of consciousness produced by the techniques is an open question. Crowley himself was agnostic on the matter, suggesting practitioners should focus on results rather than worrying about metaphysical explanations. Thelema attracted a small but devoted following during Crowley's lifetime and grew after his death in 1947. Today there are Thelemic organizations worldwide studying Crowley's writings and practicing his methods. The OTO is still active, functioning as a blend of fraternal organization and magical order. Crowley's influence on modern occultism is undeniable. Almost every contemporary magical system owes something to his work, even when practitioners don't realize it. The early 20th century also saw the emergence of new religious movements that borrowed cult structures, while claiming to be universal churches. Theosophy, founded by Helena Blavatsky in 1875, taught a synthesis of Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. Blavatsky claimed to be in contact with advanced beings called Mahatmas, who guided humanity's spiritual evolution from hidden locations in the Himalayas. Theosophy attracted educated seekers dissatisfied with conventional religion but uncomfortable with materialist atheism. It offered cosmic explanations for existence, described vast cycles of spiritual evolution, and promised that dedicated study would unlock latent psychic powers. The Theosophical Society organized into lodges, published voluminously, and recruited internationally. By the early 20th century, it had tens of thousands of members. But Theosophy also suffered from leadership crises and scandals. After Blavatsky's death in 1891, Annie Besant took over and pushed the society in new directions. She and Charles Leadbeater, another theosophical leader, decided they'd found the next world teacher, a young Indian boy named Jiddu Krishnamurti. They took over his upbringing, grooming him to become the vehicle for a great spiritual being who would inaugurate a new age. Krishnamurti went along with this until 1929, when he dissolved the organisation built around him and rejected the entire concept. He spent the rest of his life teaching that truth is a pathless land, that no organisation or belief system can lead to liberation. His rejection humiliated the Theosophical Society and split the movement. Some members left, others doubled down on the esotericism. The society continued but never regained its early prestige. The Krishnamurti incident illustrates a recurring problem for cults and secret societies. When you base your organisation on special revelation or hidden knowledge, you're vulnerable to anyone who claims higher knowledge or more direct access to the source. Krishnamurti was supposed to be the ultimate authority, then he denied the entire premise. What does an organisation do when its prophesied Messiah says the organisation is unnecessary? As the 20th century progressed, secret societies and cults began taking on more sinister forms. The occult revival of the late 1800s had been relatively harmless, middle-class people in lodge halls practicing rituals. But some groups started pushing boundaries, experimenting with practices that earlier occultists had avoided or condemned. In Germany during the 1920s, several occult groups emerged that blended racial theories with esoteric teachings. The Thule Society, founded in Munich in 1918, combined Volkisch nationalism with occult symbolism. Members believed in the existence of ancient Aryan civilizations with advanced spiritual powers, which modern Germans needed to reclaim. The swastika, appropriated from ancient symbols, became their emblem. The Thule Society itself wasn't large or particularly influential, but several of its members became early supporters of the Nazi Party. The connection between occultism and early Nazism is complex and often overstated. Hitler himself wasn't particularly interested in occultism, viewing it as distraction from political action. But some Nazis, particularly Heinrich Himmler, were deeply invested in esoteric theories about Aryan superiority and ancient mysteries. Himmler established the Ahnenerbe, an institute tasked with researching Germanic prehistory and proving Aryan racial superiority through archaeology and anthropology. The research was nonsense scientifically, but it had serious consequences. These pseudo-historical theories provided ideological justification for horrific policies. The occult veneer made the racial ideology seem like ancient wisdom rather than modern prejudice. After the war, stories circulated about Nazi occult practices, secret rituals in castles, quests for mystical artifacts. Much of this is exaggeration or fiction, but the kernel of truth is that some Nazi leadership did believe they were recovering ancient esoteric knowledge and that this knowledge gave them special power. The belief itself was significant, regardless of whether the magic was real. The post-war period saw new cults emerge in America, often centered around charismatic leaders who claimed special spiritual insight. The pattern was consistent. A magnetic personality attracts followers, establishes authority through claimed revelation or special knowledge, gradually increases control over members' lives, isolates the group from outside influence. The People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, began as something resembling a progressive church. Jones started preaching in Indiana in the 1950s, advocating for racial integration and social justice. His early ministry genuinely helped people. The church ran soup kitchens, provided housing assistance, and created a racially diverse community in an era when that was controversial. People joined because they believed in the mission. But Jones also claimed to have psychic powers. He performed healings during services, apparently curing cancer and other ailments through faith. These healings were staged, with plants in the audience pretending to be cured, but the congregation didn't know that. Jones used these false miracles to establish spiritual authority. If he could heal cancer, surely his other teachings carried divine weight. The church moved to California in the 1960s, settling in San Francisco. Jones cultivated connections with political figures, delivering votes and volunteers in exchange for protection and legitimacy. He was photographed with mayors and congressmen. The People's Temple appeared to be a successful religious organization doing good work in poor communities. Behind the scenes, Jones was becoming increasingly paranoid and controlling. members were expected to donate everything to the church. Jones monitored their relationships, sometimes ordering members to separate from spouses and pair with partners he selected. He began demanding that people call him Father and accept his authority in all matters. Punishment for disobedience included public humiliation, physical discipline, and forced drugging. The church had become a totalitarian organization, wearing the mask of spiritual community. In 1977, Jones moved the bulk of his followers to Guyana, a small South American country where he'd leased land for an agricultural commune. Jonestown, as it was called, was supposed to be a socialist paradise, a place where people could live according to the church's principles, away from American racism and capitalism. About 1,000 people relocated there, many leaving families behind in the United States. Jonestown quickly became a nightmare. The promised paradise was a struggling farm in the jungle. Members worked long hours in brutal heat, ate meagre rations, and attended mandatory meetings where Jones ranted for hours over loudspeakers. Armed guards prevented people from leaving. Mail was censored. Jones was using drugs heavily and showing signs of severe mental deterioration. Concerned relatives in the United States pressured Congressman Leo Ryan to investigate. In November 1978, Ryan visited Jonestown with journalists and concerned family members. The visit was tense. Jones put on a show of community happiness, but some members slipped notes to the visitors asking for help escaping. When Ryan's group prepared to leave with several defectors, Jones ordered an attack. At the airstrip, gunmen opened fire on Ryan's party, hitting the congressman and 4 others. They died on the runway. Back at Jonestown, Jones gathered the community and told them it was time to die. They'd practiced this before, what Jones called revolutionary action, though those rehearsals used harmless drinks. This time, the drinks contained cyanide and sedatives. The details of what happened next are horrific. Parents gave the poison to their children first, squirting it into babies' mouths with syringes. Then they drank it themselves. Some people resisted and were injected forcibly or shot. Jones kept talking over the loudspeaker, calling it a revolutionary act, an escape from a world that wouldn't leave them in peace. Over 900 people died in a few hours. When Guyanese troops reached Jonestown the next day, they found bodies everywhere. Families lying together, the community Jones had built ending in mass death. Jones himself died from a gunshot, possibly self-inflicted. The scale was incomprehensible. This wasn't a small cult. This was nearly 1,000 people, including 300 children. The Jonestown tragedy changed how people thought about cults. Before, cults were seen as weird but mostly harmless. After, they were understood as potentially lethal. The term drinking the Kool-Aid entered the language, though they'd actually used Flavor Aid. The phrase trivializes what happened, turning mass death into a metaphor for blind obedience. What makes Jonestown particularly disturbing is that Jones wasn't always a madman. He started with genuine idealism about racial equality and social justice. The corruption happened gradually, each step seeming justified by circumstances. He needed money for the mission, so he staged healings. He needed loyalty for the mission, so he demanded more commitment. He needed protection for the mission, so he isolated the group. By the time he was ordering mass death, the members had been conditioned for years to trust his judgment absolutely. Around the same time Jonestown was unfolding, another cult was operating in California with very different methods but similar control dynamics. Synanon began in 1958 as a drug rehabilitation program. Charles Dederick, a recovering alcoholic, created a community where addicts could live together and support each other's recovery. The approach was confrontational, breaking down members' egos through aggressive group therapy sessions called The Game. The game involved members sitting in circles and verbally attacking each other, exposing weaknesses, forcing people to confront their patterns. It was brutal but apparently effective for some. Synanon gained a reputation as a place where hopeless addicts got clean. People graduated from the program and rebuilt their lives. Politicians and celebrities praised it. Money poured in through donations and government contracts. But Dederick decided recovered addicts shouldn't leave. He reframed Synanon not as a treatment program but as a permanent alternative lifestyle. Members stayed, brought their families, turned over their assets. Synanon evolved from therapeutic community to self-contained society with its own rules and increasingly bizarre practices. In the early 1970s, Dedrick ordered all married couples to divorce and swap partners. He called it changing partners and framed it as breaking down possessive attachments. Couples who'd been married for decades were separated and told to pair with someone else. Some resisted and were expelled. Others complied, believing Dedrick's therapeutic rationale. The sexual manipulation gave Dedrick enormous power over members' most intimate relationships. Synanon also became violent toward critics. When a lawyer won a case against Synanon for holding a member against his will, Dedrick ordered retaliation. 2 Synanon members put a rattlesnake in the lawyer's mailbox. He was bitten but survived. The attack led to criminal charges against Dedrick and Synanon's eventual collapse. But for 20 years, Synanon had operated as a cult hiding behind the legitimacy of drug treatment. The 1970s saw an explosion of new religious movements in America and Europe. Some called it a spiritual awakening, others called it a cult epidemic. Young people, disillusioned with conventional religion and materialist culture, sought meaning in Eastern spirituality, communal living, and charismatic teachers. Most of these groups were harmless, if odd. Some weren't. The Children of God, later called the Family International, began in 1968 as a Jesus movement commune in California. David Berg, the founder, preached a radical interpretation of Christianity mixed with sexual liberation. Berg believed that sharing love meant sharing bodies, that traditional Christian sexual morality was repressive legalism. The group practiced what they called flirty fishing, where female members would seduce potential converts, using sex as recruitment. Berg's teachings grew increasingly bizarre and abusive. He wrote prolifically, distributing letters to followers that outlined complex theological justifications for practices that were essentially organized exploitation. Children born in the group were raised communally, often separated from their parents, subjected to situations no child should experience. The group operated in multiple countries, moving when authorities started investigating. The family eventually renounced some of Berg's more extreme teachings after his death in 1994, but the damage was done. Former members spent years recovering from childhoods in the group. Legal cases alleged systematic harm. The organization claimed it had reformed, but the legacy of Berg's theology remained. It's a common pattern. Charismatic founder establishes total authority, uses religious language to justify harm, followers either comply or leave, organization continues in modified form after the founder dies. Scientology followed a different trajectory. Founded by L. Ron Hubbard in 1954, Scientology presented itself as a science of the mind, later evolving into a full religion. Hubbard had been a science fiction writer who developed a therapeutic technique called Dianetics in 1950. The technique involved guided recall of traumatic experiences to release their negative effects. It was essentially a form of talk therapy wrapped in pseudo-scientific jargon. Dianetics became a bestseller and attracted thousands of practitioners, but Hubbard faced professional criticism and legal challenges over medical claims. So he reframed his techniques as religious practice, founding the Church of Scientology. This gave the organization religious protections while maintaining the therapeutic practices. Members paid for courses ascending through levels of spiritual training, each level promising greater abilities and understanding. The theology Hubbard developed was elaborate. Humans were actually immortal spiritual beings called thetans, who'd become trapped in physical bodies over countless lifetimes. Through Scientology training, you could recover your full spiritual powers. At the highest levels, you learned about Xenu, a galactic dictator who brought billions of beings to Earth millions of years ago, and destroyed them with hydrogen bombs. Their confused spirits now cluster around humans, causing problems. This sounds like science fiction because Hubbard was a science fiction writer, but Scientologists treat it as sacred truth. The Xenu story isn't revealed until operating Thetan Level 3, after members have invested years and tens of thousands of dollars. By that point, they're deeply committed. The cognitive dissonance of rejecting the teaching after such investment is enormous. Most accept it and continue. Scientology became known for aggressive defense against critics. The organization has substantial resources and uses them. Critics face lawsuits, private investigators, harassment campaigns. Operation Snow White, a Scientology operation in the 1970s, involved infiltrating government offices to steal documents and plant surveillance devices. It was the largest infiltration of the US government ever by a private organization. 11 Scientology officials went to prison, though the organization survived. The church still exists, with substantial property holdings and celebrity members. Exact membership numbers are disputed, but it's clearly much smaller than it was during its 1970s and 80s peak. Critics have become more vocal, particularly former high-ranking members who've written tell-alls exposing internal practices, but the organisation continues, protected by religious status and deep pockets. What Scientology demonstrates is how a cult can become an institution. It has infrastructure, legal legitimacy, financial resources. It's not dependent on a single charismatic leader anymore, though Hubbard's writings remain scripture. It's a system that perpetuates itself through true believers and financial incentives for those running it. Even as membership declines, the institution persists. Moving into the 1980s, a different kind of cult panic emerged, the Satanic Panic. Triggered by a 1980 book called Michelle Remembers, which detailed allegedly recovered memories of ritual abuse, Americans became convinced that secret satanic cults were operating across the country, abusing children in daycare centers and conducting human offerings. The panic was fueled by therapists using questionable techniques to recover supposedly repressed memories, by Christian fundamentalists warning about occult influences, and by sensational media coverage. Daycare workers were accused of elaborate ritual abuse involving secret tunnels, animal sacrifice, and organized networks of abusers. The McMartin preschool case in California became the longest and most expensive trial in US history. The evidence in these cases was thin to non-existent. No tunnels were found, no physical evidence supported the claims. The testimony came almost entirely from children who'd been repeatedly questioned using suggestive techniques. But the panic was real, the fear genuine. People believed their communities were infiltrated by organized evil. Looking back, the Satanic Panic was mass hysteria, a modern witch hunt. But it did real damage. Innocent people went to prison for years on false charges. Families were destroyed. The panic also obscured actual cases of abuse by focusing attention on fantastical conspiracies instead of the more mundane reality of how harm usually occurs. The panic eventually faded as evidence failed to materialize, and some convictions were overturned. But it demonstrated how fear of cults could spiral into irrational persecution. The very thing people feared, groups targeting innocents based on ideology, they enacted themselves through false accusations and wrongful prosecutions. The 1990s brought different kinds of groups. Apocalyptic movements convinced the world would end soon. The Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, believed their leader David Koresh was a prophet preparing them for the end times. Koresh taught that he was the final prophet, that he alone could open the 7 seals described in the Book of Revelation. Members lived communally at the Mount Carmel compound, studying Koresh's teachings for hours daily. Koresh exercised total authority over the group. He took multiple wives, including teenagers, fathering numerous children. He claimed divine right to all the women in the community, separating members from their spouses. Members accepted this because they believed Koresh genuinely was a prophet. If God spoke through him, who were they to question? In 1993, federal agents attempted to execute search and arrest warrants at Mount Carmel, investigating weapons violations and allegations of abuse. The raid went disastrously wrong. Shooting broke out, though who fired first is disputed. 4 agents and 6 Branch Davidians died in the initial confrontation. A 51-day siege followed, with federal agents surrounding the compound, while negotiators tried to resolve the situation peacefully. The siege ended when the FBI decided to force the issue, using armoured vehicles to punch holes in the compound and pump in tear gas. Fire broke out, spreading rapidly through the wooden structure. 76 people died in the fire, including Koresh and 25 children. Whether the Branch Davidians started the fire as a final act, or whether it began accidentally, remains contested. Waco became a rallying point for anti-government groups who saw it as proof that the federal government would murder religious believers. It inspired domestic terrorism, most notably the Oklahoma City bombing 2 years later, carried out on the anniversary of the fire. But Waco also raised questions about how authorities should handle armed religious groups. The aggressive approach had led to massive loss of life. Would patience have saved those people, or was confrontation inevitable, given Koresh's apocalyptic beliefs? While Waco dominated American attention, Japanese society was dealing with its own cult crisis. Shinrikyo, founded by Shoko Asahara in 1984, blended Buddhism, Hinduism, an apocalyptic Christianity into a movement convinced that world catastrophe was imminent. Asahara claimed to be enlightened, to have special powers, to receive divine revelations. He taught that his followers needed to accumulate good karma before the apocalypse through intensive meditation and loyalty to him. Om attracted highly educated members, particularly scientists and engineers. The group's inner circle included people with advanced degrees who worked on the cult's projects. This became significant when Asahara decided that Om needed to defend itself against perceived enemies. The scientist built weapons. In 1995, Om members released sarin nerve gas in the Tokyo subway system during morning rush hour. They punctured bags of liquid sarin with sharpened umbrella tips and left them on trains. The gas spread through multiple stations, affecting thousands of people. 13 died, and thousands more suffered injuries. It was domestic terrorism on a massive scale using chemical weapons. The attack shocked Japan, a society that prided itself on safety and order. That a religious group could develop military-grade nerve gas and deploy it against civilians was incomprehensible. The investigation revealed that Aum had been building toward violence for years. They'd already attempted other attacks. They'd kidnapped and murdered former members and critics. They'd tried to assassinate judges with VX nerve agent. The subway attack was the culmination of escalating violence. Asahara was captured, tried, and eventually executed in 2018. The cult was banned but reformed under new names, still attracting members despite its history. This points to something disturbing about how cults function. Even after catastrophic failure and the deaths of innocents, true believers find ways to continue. They reinterpret the disaster as a test, as persecution, as anything except evidence that their beliefs were wrong. The turn of the millennium saw both old cult patterns and new variations. The internet enabled groups to recruit globally and coordinate across distances. It also made information about cults more accessible, though distinguishing good information from conspiracy theories became harder. NXIVM presented itself as a self-help organization teaching a curriculum called Rational Inquiry. Founded by Keith Raniere in 1998, NXIVM offered expensive courses, promising to help people overcome psychological limitations. The techniques combined elements of neurolinguistic programming, Ayn Rand's philosophy, and standard self-help concepts. Many participants found the initial courses helpful, reporting breakthroughs in personal confidence. But NXIVM had a secret inner circle called DOS, positioned as a women's empowerment group but functioning as something darker. Women were recruited into DOS with the understanding it was a secret sorority. They had to provide collateral, damaging information or materials that would be released if they broke their vow of secrecy. This might be nude photos, false confessions of crimes, or anything that would destroy their reputation or career. Once committed, DOS members became slaves in a master-slave structure. Each slave recruited her own slaves, creating a pyramid with Raniere at the top. Women were ordered to follow strict diets, maintain extremely low body weights, and be available for sex with Raniere. Some were branded with a symbol containing Raniere's initials, a procedure done without anesthetic. The branding became NXIVM's undoing. When one woman went public about her experience, investigators began examining the organization seriously. The collateral system constituted blackmail. The master-slave structure and sexual coercion were abusive. In 2019, Raniere was convicted of racketeering, forced labor, and other charges. Several of his co-conspirators also went to prison. What made NXIVM notable was how it recruited. This wasn't a fringe group meeting in someone's basement. NXIVM had centers in multiple countries, attracted wealthy professionals, and got celebrity endorsements. Actress Alison Mack, known for the TV show Smallville, was a high-ranking member who recruited others and participated in DOS leadership. The group had the trappings of legitimacy, complete with corporate structure and sophisticated marketing. NXIVM also shows how modern cults hide in plain sight. Call yourself a self-help organization, a coaching program, a personal development company. Focus on career success and psychological growth. Once people are invested, gradually introduce more demanding practices, more invasive commitments. By the time they realize it's a cult, they've already given so much it's hard to walk away. Online spaces have created new opportunities for cult-like groups. QAnon emerged from internet message boards in 2017, claiming that an anonymous government insider, Q, was revealing a secret war between good and evil. According to QAnon, a cabal of powerful elites were involved in unspeakable acts, and Donald Trump was secretly fighting them. Q posted cryptic messages that followers decoded, finding hidden meanings and predictions. QAnon doesn't fit traditional cult definitions. There's no central organization, no compound, no single leader, but it functions psychologically like a cult. It provides a totalizing worldview where everything is part of the grand conspiracy. It creates insider-outsider dynamics, where only those who believe are enlightened while everyone else is asleep. It demands loyalty and progressive commitment, with followers spending hours researching connections and spreading the message. The movement has led to real-world violence and criminal acts. Believers have destroyed their relationships with family members who won't accept QAnon claims. Some have faced legal consequences for threats or actions based on the conspiracy theory. In 2021, some QAnon followers participated in the Capitol riot, convinced they were part of a righteous cause. QAnon demonstrates how the internet allows cult dynamics to operate without physical organization. People radicalize themselves by going deeper into online spaces where the conspiracy theory is reinforced constantly. Algorithms on social media platforms feed them more content aligned with what they're already viewing, creating echo chambers. The result is similar to traditional cult isolation, but achieved through information bubbles rather than physical separation. Throughout history, certain patterns repeat. Charismatic leaders emerge claiming special knowledge. They attract followers seeking meaning or community. The group develops its own reality, its own language, its own rules. Members invest deeply, making it painful to leave. The group becomes increasingly demanding and isolated. Sometimes it ends quietly as members drift away. Sometimes it ends catastrophically. The human needs that cults exploit are legitimate. People do need community. They do need purpose and meaning. They do want to be part of something larger than themselves. Traditional institutions like churches and civic organizations used to provide these things. As those institutions weakened in many societies, cults rushed in to fill the void. They offer instant community and clear purpose, though at a cost. Understanding historical cults helps us recognize contemporary ones. The tactics are consistent. Love bombing, where new members are showered with attention and affection. Information control, limiting access to outside perspectives. Loaded language, using specialized terminology that reinforces group identity. Demands for purity, requiring ever greater commitment. These techniques have worked for thousands of years because they work on fundamental aspects of human psychology. Ancient mystery cults understood this. The Eleusinian mysteries created transformation through controlled experience. Medieval heretical movements understood this. They offered meaning to people the church ignored. Modern cults understand this. They identify what people need and provide it, at least initially. The question isn't whether people will form groups with secret knowledge and strong boundaries. They always have and likely always will. The question is how to satisfy the legitimate needs that cults exploit without enabling abusive structures. Communities that provide meaning and belonging without demanding total loyalty. Teachers who share knowledge without claiming absolute authority. Groups that encourage growth while respecting members' autonomy. Some argue that the distinction between cult and religion is just time and success. Socially accepted religions were once marginal cults. Christianity was a mystery cult in the Roman Empire before it became the establishment. Islam began as a revolutionary movement that threatened existing power structures. Buddhism started as a reform movement within Hinduism. If a cult survives long enough and gains enough followers, it becomes a religion. There's truth to this, but it misses important distinctions. Cults tend to concentrate power in a living leader who cannot be questioned. Religions typically have institutional authority that outlasts any individual. Cults isolate members from outside relationships. Religions usually maintain connections to broader society. Cults make leaving difficult and costly. Religions generally allow people to leave without punishment. These aren't perfect distinctions, but they matter. The Mormon Church provides an interesting case study in this transition. Joseph Smith founded it in 1830 based on claimed revelations and golden plates that only he could read. The early movement was clearly a cult by modern definitions. Smith had absolute authority, practiced polygamy secretly while denying it publicly, and created a closed community that moved repeatedly to escape persecution. When Smith was killed in 1844, the movement could have collapsed. Instead, Brigham Young led most followers to Utah, where they built a new society. Over generations, Mormonism evolved. Polygamy was abandoned after federal pressure. The church developed institutional structures not dependent on a single prophet. Members integrated into broader American society while maintaining religious distinctiveness. Today, the Mormon Church is generally considered a legitimate religion, though one with unusual beliefs. The transition from cult to church took over a century and required fundamental changes in how the organization operated. Scientology is attempting a similar transition, though with less success. It has institutional structures, real estate, religious recognition in some countries, but it still operates with cult-like characteristics, aggressive response to critics, difficult exit procedures, concentrated power in leadership. Whether Scientology will complete the transition to respectability or remain in this liminal space is unclear. The occult revival of the 20th century produced groups that occupy strange territory between cult and casual interest group. Wicca, founded in the 1950s by Gerald Gardner, claims to be a survival of ancient pagan witchcraft. Historically, this is dubious. Gardner drew on various sources including ceremonial magic, folklore, and his own imagination to create what he presented as recovered tradition. But Wicca doesn't operate like a cult. There's no central authority. Covens are independent and develop their own practices. Members can leave freely. Knowledge is shared openly through published books. Anyone can start a coven or practice solitary. The structure is decentralized and voluntary. Wicca provides ritual practice, seasonal celebrations, and community for practitioners, but doesn't demand total commitment or isolation. This suggests that esoteric practices and secret knowledge don't automatically create cults. The structure matters more than the content. A group studying Kabbalah or practicing ceremonial magic or worshipping old gods can remain healthy if it maintains appropriate boundaries and respects member autonomy. Problems arise when leaders claim absolute authority and members surrender independent judgment. The satanic panics of the 1980s and the QAnon phenomenon both demonstrate how fear of cults can become its own kind of cult thinking. People become convinced that vast conspiracies of secret groups are controlling events and harming innocents. They interpret random events as evidence of the conspiracy. They reject contrary information as part of the cover-up. They become increasingly isolated as they push away anyone who doesn't share their beliefs. The anti-cult crusaders become cult-like in their own thinking patterns. This irony isn't lost on historians and psychologists who study these movements. The human mind is vulnerable to certain patterns of thought that can lead either to joining a cult or to seeing cults everywhere. Both involve surrendering critical thinking in favour of a totalizing explanation. Both create strong insider-outsider dynamics. Both can consume people's lives and relationships. The digital age enables new forms of cultic behaviour that don't fit traditional definitions but share key characteristics. Multi-level marketing organisations operate on cult-like principles. They promise financial freedom through dedication to the business. They create insider language and culture. They encourage members to cut off relationships with people who are negative about the opportunity. They structure themselves in hierarchies where most people lose money while enriching those at the top. They're legal businesses but function psychologically like cults for many participants. Some fitness and wellness communities develop cult-like qualities. Members are encouraged to centre their lives around the practice. They're told that full commitment is required to see results. They develop intense loyalty to particular methods or teachers. They view outsiders as not understanding. The practice itself might be benign, even beneficial, but the social structure around it becomes cultish. Online communities around conspiracy theories, political ideologies or fandoms can become cultish. Members spend hours daily immersed in the community. They develop specialised knowledge and language. They bond over shared beliefs that outsiders don't understand. They experience the community as family. When someone tries to leave or questions core beliefs, they face hostility and shunning. These aren't cults in the traditional sense, but they exploit similar psychological mechanisms. What all these diverse groups share is the promise of special knowledge or identity. You're not just a regular person. You're awakened, enlightened, one of the few who understands. This is deeply appealing. Everyone wants to feel special, to believe they've figured out something most people miss. Cults exploit this desire by creating hierarchies of knowledge and belonging. The more you commit, the more special you become. The antidote to cult thinking is humility, skepticism, and maintaining diverse relationships. Humility means recognizing that you might be wrong, that your beliefs are provisional, that certainty about ultimate truth is probably misplaced. Skepticism means questioning claims, especially when they conveniently align with what you want to believe. Diverse relationships mean staying connected to people who think differently, who will challenge your assumptions, who anchor you in broader reality. These practices are difficult because they require constant effort. It's easier to surrender to certainty, to find a group that agrees with you completely, to dismiss contrary evidence. Cults offer this ease. They take the burden of decision-making and complexity away. Follow the leader, trust the teaching, and everything becomes simple. For people overwhelmed by modern life's uncertainty, this simplification is tempting. But simplification is a trap. Reality is complex. Any system that claims to explain everything simply is lying or deluded. The mystery cults of ancient times at least acknowledged mystery at their core. Modern cults often claim certainty about things no one can really know. They promise answers to questions that might not have clear answers. They offer control over circumstances that are actually unpredictable. Looking back over 4 millennia of secret societies and cults, what stands out is the consistency of human nature. We've always sought meaning beyond the everyday. We've always formed exclusive groups. We've always been susceptible to charismatic leaders and grand promises. The particular beliefs change with each era, reflecting contemporary anxieties and aspirations, but the underlying dynamics remain remarkably stable. Ancient mystery cults promised immortality or divine favour. Medieval heresies promised spiritual purity and escape from corrupt institutions. Early modern secret societies promised hidden knowledge and power. Modern cults promise enlightenment, prosperity, or salvation from coming catastrophe. The content changes, but the structure persists. There's a truth you don't know. I can teach it to you. But first, you must prove yourself worthy. Commit fully. Trust me. Don't question. Together we are special. Apart from us is darkness. This formula works because it addresses real psychological needs while exploiting vulnerabilities. People do need to belong. They do need purpose. They do benefit from commitment to something beyond themselves. Healthy groups provide these things while respecting autonomy. Cults provide them while demanding surrender. The challenge is discerning the difference, especially from inside. When you're in the middle of group dynamics, experiencing the belonging and purpose, it's hard to evaluate objectively. Everything feels meaningful. Doubts seem like weakness or outside corruption. The group's explanations for why people leave or criticize all make sense from inside the belief system. Former cult members often describe the moment they realized the truth as simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant everything they'd believed and invested in was false. Liberating because they could finally see clearly again. That clarity comes at enormous cost. They've lost years, relationships, sometimes children who remain in the group. Recovery takes time, often requiring therapy to work through the experience. But recovery is possible. People do leave cults and rebuild their lives. Support networks for former members exist. Therapists specialize in cult recovery. Families can reconnect, though the relationship is often changed. Former members frequently become the most effective cult educators, using their experience to help others recognize warning signs. The internet has enabled former members to connect and share their stories publicly. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and blogs document cult experiences in detail. This transparency helps both people trying to leave and those trying to understand what their loved ones are experiencing. It also provides evidence for researchers studying these groups. Academic study of cults, properly called new religious movements in scholarly contexts, has advanced significantly. Researchers have identified common patterns of recruitment, indoctrination, and control. They've documented the psychological techniques cults use and their effects on members. This knowledge helps develop interventions and supports legal frameworks for prosecuting abuses. But studying cults is difficult. Active groups resist scrutiny. Former members' testimony can be biased by their experiences. Determining what actually happened inside secretive groups often requires piecing together fragments of evidence, and some groups are sophisticated about legal protections, operating just within legal bounds while maintaining abusive dynamics. Religious freedom laws, vital for protecting legitimate spiritual practice, also protect cults. Courts are reluctant to interfere with religious groups' internal operations. This is generally good, preventing government overreach. But it means cults can continue harming people as long as they frame their practices in religious terms. Finding the balance between protecting religious freedom and preventing abuse is an ongoing challenge. Some argue that adults should be free to make their own choices, even if those choices seem unwise to outsiders. If someone wants to join a demanding group, give their money away, and follow a charismatic leader, that's their right. This libertarian perspective has merit. Government shouldn't protect people from their own decisions, but it breaks down when considering children raised in cults, people coerced through psychological manipulation, or cases involving fraud and violence. The question of when intervention is justified doesn't have easy answers. Clear cases of physical harm, child abuse, fraud, or imprisonment warrant legal action. But psychological manipulation, demanding lifestyle changes, social isolation, these are harder to address legally while respecting civil liberties. Many former cult members say they wish someone had intervened, but at the time they would have resisted any intervention as persecution. Families of cult members face impossible situations. They watch someone they love disappear into a group, changing personality, cutting contact. Do they try forcibly removing the person? Deprogramming, the practice of kidnapping cult members to break their indoctrination, was tried in the 1970s and 80s. Results were mixed, sometimes breaking the cult's hold, but often traumatizing people and strengthening their commitment to the group. Modern exit counseling takes a softer approach, providing information and maintaining loving contact while respecting the person's agency. The theory is that maintaining relationship gives members a tether to life outside the cult. When doubts arise, as they often eventually do, having somewhere safe to turn makes leaving possible. Cutting someone off can push them deeper into the group by eliminating alternatives. Throughout this long history, from Mesopotamian temple cults to modern internet movements, certain lessons emerge. Cults thrive where legitimate needs go unmet. Strong families, communities, and social institutions serve as protection. Critical thinking skills and psychological education help people recognize manipulation. Maintaining diverse relationships provides perspective. Healthy skepticism, different from cynicism, protects against both joining cults and becoming obsessed with them. The 4,000 years we've covered show that secret societies and cults aren't going away. They're too deeply rooted in human nature. But understanding them better, knowing the patterns, recognizing the techniques gives us tools for navigating the landscape more safely. Not everyone who joins a meditation group or attends an alternative church is in a cult. Most aren't. But knowing the warning signs helps distinguish between healthy communities and dangerous groups. Those warning signs, refined through studying thousands of groups, a charismatic leader who cannot be questioned, claims of special knowledge available only to the initiated, pressure to cut ties with outside relationships, demands for increasing commitment of time and resources, punishment for questioning or expressing doubt, black and white thinking where the group is all good and outside is all bad, and belief that the ends justify any means. Not every cult has all these features. Some operate subtly, developing slowly over years. Others are obvious from the start but disguise their true nature during recruitment. The most dangerous cults are often those that seem most benign initially. They meet genuine needs, solve real problems, provide actual community. The abusive elements emerge gradually, once members are invested enough that leaving becomes difficult. As we close this journey through 4 millennia of secret knowledge and hidden groups, the pattern is clear. Humans will always seek mystery, meaning, and belonging. We'll always form exclusive groups around shared beliefs. We'll always be vulnerable to those who claim to have answers to life's hardest questions. The specific forms change with technology and culture, but the underlying needs and vulnerabilities remain constant. Understanding this history doesn't make us immune, but it gives us better maps for navigating the territory between healthy spiritual seeking and dangerous devotion. The Hermetic traditions of the Renaissance carried forward ideas from ancient Egypt and Greece, wrapped in Christian mysticism to avoid persecution. Hermes Trismegistus, supposedly an ancient Egyptian sage, was actually a fictional composite created from Greek and Egyptian sources. But Renaissance scholars didn't know this. They believed the Hermetic texts were genuinely ancient, predating Christianity, containing wisdom from the dawn of civilization. These texts taught that humans could achieve divine knowledge through understanding the cosmos. As above, so below was the core principle. The patterns of the heavens reflected earthly patterns. By studying one, you understood the other. This wasn't just philosophy. Practitioners believed they could manipulate reality through this knowledge, performing what they called natural magic. Figures like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola built entire philosophical systems around hermetic principles. They were respectable scholars, not fringe occultists. The line between magic and science hadn't been drawn clearly yet. Isaac Newton spent as much time on alchemical experiments as on physics. The occult and the rational coexisted in ways modern minds find strange. Secret societies formed around these studies because the knowledge was dangerous politically. The Church watched carefully for heresy. Claiming you could manipulate cosmic forces through knowledge sounded like usurping God's role. So scholars worked quietly, sharing findings through coded letters, meeting in private. The secrecy wasn't just about preserving mysteries, it was about survival. The Rosicrucian manifestos of the early 1600s claimed a secret brotherhood of adepts existed, working to transform society through hidden wisdom. The manifestos described elaborate initiations and promised that worthy seekers would be contacted by the Brotherhood. They never were, because the Brotherhood didn't exist. It was likely a Protestant allegory or literary exercise, but people believed it. The desire to believe in secret masters, hidden adepts who possess transcendent knowledge, runs deep. It's comforting to think that somewhere, someone understands what's really happening, that wisdom exists even if we don't have access to it yet. This belief has generated countless groups claiming connection to those imagined masters. Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Masters in Tibet, the Great White Brotherhood, the Ascended Masters, various New Age channeled entities, they all follow this pattern. Someone claims contact with advanced beings who possess secret knowledge. The beings can't appear publicly because humanity isn't ready, but they've chosen this particular person as their channel or representative. Conveniently unfalsifiable, these claims work because they're constructed to be immune to disproof. The masters exist in hidden locations or higher dimensions. They operate beyond normal perception. Only the specially trained or naturally gifted can contact them. If you can't verify their existence, that just proves you're not advanced enough. The logic is circular but effective. The 19th century spiritualist movement operated on similar principles but democratized the process. Anyone could develop mediumship. The spirits of the dead wanted to communicate with the living and would do so through willing channels. Seances became social entertainment. Tables rapped out messages. Mediums produced ectoplasm. Spirits wrote messages on slates. Most of this was fraud. Investigators repeatedly caught mediums using tricks, but the movement thrived anyway. People desperately wanted to believe their dead relatives could communicate. The mediums provided comfort, even if the methods were questionable. Some mediums probably believed in their own gifts, interpreting their tricks as helping spirits manifest. The Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882, tried to investigate these claims scientifically. They documented thousands of cases of supposed paranormal phenomena. Their conclusions were mixed. Most cases had natural explanations, but some researchers felt certain cases resisted explanation. The debate continues. What's clear is that the human desire for contact with hidden realms generates endless claims and movements. Spiritualism fed into the occult revival that produced groups like the Golden Dawn. These organizations tried to systematize magic, creating curricula and examinations like academic programs. You studied correspondences between planets, colors, sounds, and symbols. You learned ritual techniques for entering altered states. You practiced divination and astral projection. The approach was surprisingly intellectual, treating magic as a discipline requiring rigorous study. But the human element always complicated things. Organizations fractured over personality conflicts and disagreements about doctrine. Leaders claimed higher authority than their peers. Sexual scandals erupted. Money went missing. The same dramas that plague any human organization affected occult orders, but with added intensity because the stakes felt cosmic. Aleister Crowley's magical career exemplifies this. He was genuinely brilliant, creating a comprehensive magical system that influenced countless practitioners. His writings are complex, drawing on multiple traditions and requiring serious study. But he was also egotistical. self-destructive, and manipulative. He burned through relationships and organizations. His personal behavior often contradicted his philosophical teachings. This contradiction is common in cult leaders. They preach enlightenment while behaving destructively. They teach liberation while controlling followers. Sometimes this is conscious hypocrisy. Often it's not. They genuinely believe their own specialness exempts them from rules that bind others. The guru is beyond conventional morality. What looks like exploitation is actually teaching. The cognitive dissonance is resolved through spiritual rationalizations. Crowley taught that discovering and following your true will was the highest attainment. But in practice, his students' true wills seemed remarkably aligned with doing what Crowley wanted. This is how spiritual teachings get corrupted. A genuine insight that true purpose differs from social conditioning becomes justification for the teacher's authority. If only I understand true will, then questioning me means you haven't found yours yet. The process happens gradually. A teacher has genuine insights and shares them effectively. Students benefit and become devoted. The teacher begins believing his own mythology. Small boundary violations occur and are rationalized. The group culture shifts to protect the teacher. By the time serious abuse happens, structures are in place to hide and excuse it. No one planned this progression. It emerged from human weakness and group dynamics. Eastern spiritual teachers who came to the West in the 20th century often followed this trajectory. They arrived with authentic training in demanding traditions. Western students, hungry for spiritual guidance, idealized them. The teachers enjoyed the adulation. Cultural differences meant behaviors that would be checked in their home cultures went unchallenged in the West. Power corrupted gradually. Chogyam Trungpa, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher who established centers across North America, was genuinely learned in Buddhist philosophy and meditation. He also drank heavily, slept with students, and created an inner circle that mimicked feudal hierarchy. His students explain this as crazy wisdom, deliberate violation of convention to break through students' attachments. Maybe sometimes it was. But it was also alcoholism and sexual exploitation. This pattern repeated across multiple teachers and traditions. The structure was similar to older Western cults but clothed in Eastern spirituality. The language changed from sin and salvation to karma and enlightenment, but the dynamics remained. A special teacher possessed rare knowledge. Students needed complete devotion to progress. Questioning indicated spiritual weakness. The teacher's behavior, however troubling, served higher purposes students couldn't understand. Some organizations developed elaborate structures to maintain control. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the Hare Krishnas, built a worldwide network of temples where devotees lived communally. Members surrendered possessions, followed strict rules, and spent hours daily in religious practice. The founder, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, was a legitimate scholar of Hindu texts. But the organization he built displayed cult characteristics. Members worked long hours selling books and flowers to support the temples. They ate minimal vegetarian diets and slept little. The exhaustion and malnutrition kept them compliant. Children born in the movement were separated from parents and raised in ashram schools where abuse occurred. Former members documented systematic mistreatment spanning decades. After Prabhupada's death in 1977, the organization fractured into competing factions. Some leaders who'd been elevated to guru status fell spectacularly. Revealed as frauds or abusers, the movement reformed somewhat, addressing past problems and moderating practices. But the damage to those raised in the organization couldn't be undone. Their childhoods were gone. This raises difficult questions about sincere belief versus exploitation. Prabhupada apparently believed his own teachings. The devotion to Krishna, the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga, these were real Hindu traditions he transmitted. But the organizational structure created conditions for abuse. Can you separate the legitimate spiritual teaching from the harmful implementation? Former members wrestle with this. The practice gave them valuable experiences alongside traumatic ones. Similar complexity marks other movements. The Osho movement, centered on Indian teacher Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, combined Eastern meditation with Western therapy techniques and sexual liberation. Rajneesh's talks were often insightful, critiquing religious hypocrisy and social conditioning. But his organization became a cult in the classical sense. When the movement established a community in Oregon in the 1980s, Rajneeshpuram, it descended into paranoia and criminality. The leadership attempted to rig local elections by bussing in homeless people and making them residents. They contaminated restaurant salad bars with salmonella to sicken voters. They plotted to assassinate a federal prosecutor. Armed security patrolled the compound. Rajneesh himself owned a fleet of Rolls-Royces while preaching non-attachment. The criminal conspiracy led to arrests and deportation for Rajneesh. The Oregon community collapsed. But the movement continued in other countries, and Osho's books still sell. Followers distinguish between Rajneesh's teachings, which they value, and the organizational crimes, which they blame on particular leaders. Whether this distinction holds depends on your perspective. What's clear is that spiritual teachings, even legitimate ones, don't prevent cult dynamics. The human elements of power, money, and control corrupt regardless of the philosophy. An enlightened teacher can still build an abusive organization. Beautiful ideas can mask ugly realities. This is perhaps the hardest lesson from studying cults. Good intentions and genuine spirituality don't protect against exploitation. The New Age movement that emerged in the 1970s and 80s seemed more diffuse than traditional cults. There was no single leader, no unified organization. Instead, it was a loose collection of beliefs and practices: crystals, channeling, past lives, alternative healing, cosmic consciousness. People could participate casually, reading books and attending workshops without joining committed groups. But within the broader movement, specific groups developed cult-like structures. The Church Universal and Triumphant, led by Elizabeth Clare Prophet, combined New Age channeling with survivalism. Prophet claimed to channel ascended masters who warned of coming catastrophe. In the late 1980s, she predicted nuclear war and convinced followers to build bomb shelters and stockpile supplies in Montana. Thousands of members relocated to the church's property, spending their savings on preparations. They lived in underground shelters, waiting for the prophesied war. It didn't happen. The specific dates passed without incident. Prophet revised the timeline, then eventually stopped making predictions. Some members left, disillusioned. Others stayed, explaining that their prayers had averted the catastrophe. The cognitive dissonance was resolved through rationalization. Prophet's organization declined after she developed dementia in the 1990s. Without her charismatic presence, the movement fragmented. But for 2 decades, she'd commanded absolute authority over thousands of people. They'd given money, relocated, and restructured their lives based on her channeled messages. The New Age packaging didn't prevent classic cult dynamics from emerging. The Heaven's Gate group combined New Age beliefs with science fiction imagery in a particularly tragic synthesis. Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, the founders, taught that Earth was about to be recycled, and that a spacecraft following Comet Hale-Bopp would rescue those who'd prepared themselves. Preparation meant shedding human attachments, including sexuality, family, and individuality. The group lived communally, following strict rules. Members wore identical clothing and had similar haircuts, erasing individual identity. Many underwent voluntary medical procedures to eliminate sexual characteristics. They viewed their bodies as temporary vehicles for their true selves, which would transfer to new bodies on the spacecraft. In 1997, as Hale-Bopp approached, Applewhite decided it was time to leave. 39 members, including Applewhite, ingested fatal combinations of drugs and alcohol in shifts. They died peacefully, apparently convinced they were departing for a better existence. They left behind detailed explanations and farewell videos, showing no signs of panic or coercion. They believed completely. Heaven's Gate demonstrates how cult beliefs become reality for members. To outsiders, the idea of a spacecraft hiding behind a comet was absurd. To the members, it was truth. They'd spent years preparing for this moment. The group's isolation and internal logic made the belief system total. There was no outside perspective to provide reality checking. The mass departure horrified the public, but made perfect sense within the group's worldview. They weren't dying. They were graduating, leaving the human level and evolving to the next stage. The physical deaths were just shedding containers that were no longer needed. From inside that belief system, their actions were rational, even joyful. This is the ultimate danger of totalistic belief systems. When the internal logic becomes completely disconnected from external reality, any action can be justified. The more outrageous the belief, the stronger the commitment it requires, which perversely strengthens devotion. If you've believed something impossible and acted on it dramatically, backing down becomes psychologically very difficult. Contemporary cults have adapted to modern skepticism and information availability. They're less likely to make falsifiable predictions or claims that can be easily disproven. Instead, they focus on unfalsifiable personal transformation, wellness claims that are subjective, or political narratives that confirm existing biases. The wellness industry has cult-like segments where influencers promise health transformation through specific protocols. Followers adopt restrictive diets, expensive supplement regimens, and lifestyle changes based on the influencer's authority. The influencer shares personal testimony rather than scientific evidence. Community forms around the protocol, with members supporting each other and defending against critics. When the protocol doesn't work, the fault lies with the follower for not following correctly, not trying hard enough, or having wrong thoughts. The system is unfalsifiable because any failure gets blamed on improper implementation. Success gets credited to the protocol. This dynamic mirrors religious cults but operates in the supposedly rational domain of health and wellness. Political movements can take cult-like forms when they develop totalistic ideologies, demand absolute loyalty, and treat dissent as betrayal. This can happen across the political spectrum. The specific ideology matters less than the psychological structure. Members divide the world sharply into enlightened allies and corrupt enemies. They consume media that reinforces their views while dismissing contrary evidence as propaganda. They experience the movement as family and purpose. Deprogramming from political cult thinking is as difficult as leaving religious cults. People's identities become fused with the ideology. Admitting you were wrong means admitting your recent life was based on false premises. The social cost of leaving is high since your community consists of fellow believers. It's easier to double down, find explanations for contradictions, and go deeper into the movement. The internet has made finding like-minded believers easier than ever. Whatever niche belief you hold, there's a community online that shares and reinforces it. This can be wonderful for people with rare interests or experiences. It can also create echo chambers where beliefs become increasingly divorced from reality through mutual reinforcement without outside input. Flat Earth believers provide a striking example. The idea that Earth is flat contradicts overwhelming evidence and is easily disproven. Yet online communities of flat earthers have grown, with members conducting experiments to prove their claims. When experiments confirm Earth's curvature, they rationalize the results. The community provides identity and purpose. Letting go of the belief means losing that community. QAnon combined many of these elements. It offered secret knowledge, cosmic struggle, community, and purpose. Believers spent hours researching connections and sharing findings. They felt like awakened truth seekers while everyone else slept. The movement provided narrative structure to confusing events, everything connected to the grand story. Random coincidences became meaningful clues. When predictions didn't come true, the timeline was adjusted or the prediction reinterpreted. Cognitive dissonance was managed through the community's collective rationalization. The alternative, admitting the whole thing was false, was too costly after investing so much time and emotion. Families were destroyed over QAnon beliefs, jobs were lost. But believers felt they were fighting for truth and children. The meaning sustained them through the costs. Multi-level marketing organizations operate on similar psychological principles. Recruits are told they're business owners, entrepreneurs taking control of their financial futures. They're taught that success requires total commitment, and that those who criticize don't understand. The community celebrates small wins while ignoring overall losses. When recruits fail to profit, they're told they didn't work hard enough or believe strongly enough. The structure is a pyramid where most participants lose money while enriching those at the top, but it's dressed in the language of personal empowerment and business opportunity. Recruits invest their savings, alienate friends and family with sales pitches, and spend years chasing success that's structurally unlikely. The business model requires constant recruitment of new people at the bottom. It's mathematically unsustainable, but psychologically compelling. The overlap between MLM tactics and cult tactics is substantial. Both use loaded language, intense social pressure, manipulation of hope and fear, and structured hierarchies where advancement is always possible but rarely achieved. Both make people feel special for joining while exploiting their labor and resources. Both are legal, operating within societal boundaries, while causing significant harm to participants. Throughout all these variations, ancient and modern, religious and secular, certain human vulnerabilities remain constant. We want to belong. We want to matter. We want to understand a confusing world. We want to believe we're special. Cults exploit these needs by offering community, purpose, explanations, and status. The cost is autonomy, critical thinking, and often material resources. Understanding this doesn't make us immune. Even people who study cults can fall into cult-like groups if the approach is right for their particular vulnerabilities. The key is maintaining relationships outside any single group, keeping perspectives diverse, and preserving the ability to question even deeply held beliefs. The tragedy is that the needs cults exploit are legitimate. Community, purpose, and meaning are genuinely important for human flourishing. A society that fails to provide these through healthy institutions leaves people vulnerable to unhealthy alternatives. The decline of traditional communities, the isolation of modern life, the loss of shared meaning-making institutions, these create conditions where cults thrive. What would it look like to meet these needs without cult dynamics? Communities that provide belonging without demanding total loyalty. Teachers who share knowledge without claiming absolute authority. Belief systems that offer meaning while remaining open to revision. Groups that strengthen members' connections to the broader world rather than isolating them. Some groups manage this balance. Religious communities that engage seriously with their traditions while maintaining critical perspectives. Educational programs that challenge students while respecting their autonomy. Social movements that organize for change while accepting internal dissent. These exist and work. They just don't get the attention that dramatic cult stories attract. The historical record shows that extreme groups are outliers. Most people most of the time navigate life without joining cults, but the potential is always there, embedded in how human psychology works. Understanding that potential, recognizing the warning signs in ourselves and others, maintaining healthy skepticism without cynicism, these practices help. As you drift towards sleep, consider that the human journey involves constant negotiation between faith and doubt, community and autonomy, meaning and uncertainty. We've been working on this balance for 4,000 years, making mistakes, learning, forgetting, and repeating. The cults we've explored are part of that story, shadow versions of our needs for transcendence and belonging. The mysteries remain mysterious. No secret knowledge will make existence simple. No group has all the answers. The ancient initiates at Eleusis saw something that changed them, but what they saw died with them. Every generation has to work out meaning for itself, finding balance between the need to belong and the need to remain free. Sleep well, knowing that the search for meaning continues, that humans will keep gathering in circles seeking truths beyond the ordinary. Some of those circles will be healthy and some won't. The wisdom is in knowing the difference, in maintaining enough independence to walk away when necessary, in finding community that enlarges life rather than consuming it. The 4,000 years we've traversed tonight show patterns that repeat because human nature remains consistent. But they also show adaptation, learning, and change. We understand manipulation better now than our ancestors did. We have frameworks for recognizing unhealthy groups. We have resources for recovery. The story isn't finished. It continues with each person who chooses awareness over certainty, connection over control, and questions over absolute answers. The medieval period produced one of history's most peculiar cults, the Flagellants, who emerged during the Black Death. As plague devastated Europe in the 1340s, killing perhaps a third of the population, some believed it was divine punishment for sin. Groups of penitents formed, travelling from town to town, publicly whipping themselves to atone for humanity's transgressions. The practice began in Eastern Europe and spread westward. Flagellants would arrive in a town, form a circle in the main square, strip to the waist, and beat themselves with leather whips studded with metal points. They chanted hymns while blood ran down their backs. Townspeople watched, joining in the prayers, hoping this extreme penance would convince God to lift the plague. The movement developed its own theology. Flagellants claimed their suffering was more powerful than church sacraments. They didn't need priests or formal religion. Their blood sacrifice directly appeased God. This challenged church authority fundamentally. The Pope condemned the movement in 1349, but it continued for years before gradually fading. What drove people to this extreme behaviour? The plague created existential terror. Traditional religious responses seemed inadequate when priests were dying alongside everyone else. The flagellants offered action, something visible and dramatic. The physical pain provided psychological release, a way to channel overwhelming fear and grief. The community formed through shared suffering created bonds during a time when social order was collapsing. Modern psychology recognizes the mechanisms at work. Extreme rituals can induce altered states of consciousness. Physical pain releases endorphins, creating a sense of euphoria. Synchronized group activity generates collective effervescence, a feeling of unity and transcendence. The flagellants weren't simply punishing themselves, they were using pain to achieve something approaching religious ecstasy. This pattern appears across cultures and eras. Ascetic practices involving pain or deprivation can produce profound experiences. Whether those experiences reflect spiritual truth or neurochemical reactions depends on your worldview. For practitioners, the distinction might not matter. The experience is real and meaningful regardless of its source. The medieval period also saw the rise of mystical movements within Christianity that operated in tension with church authority. The Beguines were communities of religious women who lived together, supported themselves through labour, and practiced devotional Christianity without taking formal vows or joining established orders. This independence made them suspect. Beguines studied scripture, wrote theological texts, and claimed direct experience of God. Marguerite Porete, a Beguine, wrote The Mirror of Simple Souls, describing the soul's union with God in language that church authorities found heretical. She was burned at the stake in 1310. Her crime was teaching that the soul could achieve such unity with God that it transcended the need for church mediation or moral law. This idea, annihilationism or the free spirit heresy, appeared repeatedly in medieval mysticism. If the soul unites completely with God, it becomes divine itself. If it's divine, conventional morality no longer applies. The truly enlightened soul operates beyond good and evil. You can see why church authorities considered this dangerous. It justified antinomianism, the rejection of moral law as unnecessary for the spiritually advanced. Did Marguerite actually mean her work should be interpreted this way? Probably not. She was writing in the tradition of bridal mysticism, using erotic language to describe the soul's relationship with God. But church inquisitors read it as claiming liberation from sin and moral law. Whether through genuine misunderstanding or deliberate misreading, they condemned teachings that threatened institutional authority. The pattern repeats throughout religious history. Mystical movements arise, claiming direct access to the divine. Institutions feel threatened because direct experience bypasses their authority. The institutions suppress the movements, often violently. Some mystics recant, some are executed, and some go underground. Their ideas persist, surfacing again in different forms, different centuries. Jewish mysticism followed similar patterns. Kabbalah emerged in medieval Spain and France, teaching that sacred texts contained hidden layers of meaning accessible only through special interpretive techniques. The universe itself was structured according to divine emanations, the Sephirot, and understanding these structures allowed practitioners to influence spiritual realms. Kabbalistic study was traditionally restricted to married men over 40 who'd already mastered conventional Jewish learning. The knowledge was considered dangerous for the unprepared. Stories warned of scholars who delved too deeply into mystical study and went mad or died. The Tree of Life, the central Kabbalistic symbol, required years to understand properly. Rushing into advanced study without foundation could destabilize the mind. This creates interesting questions about the relationship between knowledge and psychological harm. Were the warnings about mystical danger metaphorical, emphasizing the need for preparation and maturity? Or did Kabbalistic practices actually produce psychological crises in some practitioners? Intensive meditation on abstract concepts combined with ascetic practices and social isolation could certainly trigger psychotic episodes in vulnerable individuals. The Sabbatean movement in the 17th century demonstrated how messianic belief could destabilize entire communities. Sabbatai Zevi, a charismatic rabbi, claimed to be the Messiah. His teaching spread rapidly through the Jewish diaspora. Communities from Yemen to Amsterdam believed redemption was imminent. People sold their possessions and prepared for the return to the Holy Land. Then Sabbatai was arrested by Ottoman authorities and given a choice: convert to Islam or die. He converted. This should have ended the movement instantly. The Messiah had apostatized. But significant numbers of followers found ways to interpret this as part of the messianic plan. Sabbatai had to descend into the realm of evil to redeem it from within. His conversion was strategic, not genuine. The redemption would still come. Some followers, called Sabbateans or Donme, converted to Islam publicly while practicing their own hybrid religion secretly. They formed closed communities, married only among themselves, and passed their beliefs down through generations. Communities of Donme existed in Turkey into the 20th century, maintaining their distinct identity while appearing to be Muslim. The Sabbatean crisis shows how cognitive dissonance gets resolved when prophecy fails. Instead of abandoning belief after the dramatic disconfirmation of Sabbatai's conversion, devoted followers reinterpreted the event to preserve their worldview. The alternative, admitting they'd been wrong about something so central to their identity, was psychologically impossible. Reinterpreting reality was easier than changing belief. This same mechanism explains how modern cults survive failed prophecies. When the predicted apocalypse doesn't happen, leaders receive new revelations explaining the delay. Members who've invested everything have strong motivation to accept these explanations. Leaving means admitting waste and error. Staying means maintaining meaning and community. Most stay. The 18th century Hasidic movement reformed Judaism through mystical practice and charismatic leadership. The Baal Shem Tov, the movement's founder, taught that joy and worship mattered more than scholarly learning, that simple people could reach God through heartfelt prayer and dance. This democratized religious experience, making it accessible beyond the scholarly elite. Hasidism organized around rebbes, spiritual leaders believed to have special connection to the divine. Each rebbe gathered disciples who looked to him for guidance in all aspects of life. The relationship between rebbe and follower was intensely personal. The rebbe could perceive your spiritual state, diagnose problems, and prescribe remedies. His blessing had power. His teaching carried divine authority. This structure created possibilities for both profound spiritual guidance and exploitation. Some rebbes were genuine spiritual teachers who helped followers grow. Others were charlatans who used their position for personal benefit. Distinguishing between them from inside the follower relationship was difficult. The system required complete trust in the rebbe's judgment. Hasidism eventually became one of the most conservative forms of Judaism, but it began as a radical reform movement threatening established religious authority. The Mitnagdim, opponents of Hasidism, viewed it as dangerous enthusiasm that prioritized emotion over study and gave rebbes inappropriate authority. They banned interaction with Hasidim and tried to suppress the movement, but Hasidism survived and thrived, becoming a major strand of Jewish practice. Today's Hasidic communities maintain distinctive dress, customs, and social structures. They're often called insular or cult-like by outsiders. Members would say they're preserving authentic tradition in a world that's abandoned it. Both perspectives have validity. The communities do provide strong identity and support. They also restrict individual freedom significantly, particularly for women. The American religious landscape of the 19th century was remarkably creative, generating new religious movements at an unusual rate. The Second Great Awakening sparked intense religious feeling and experimentation. People believed America was chosen for special spiritual destiny. New prophets arose, claiming fresh revelations that would complete or correct traditional Christianity. The Shakers, formerly the United Society of Believers, taught that their founder Ann Lee was the female Christ. God was both male and female, and Jesus represented the male aspect while Mother Ann represented the female. Salvation required both. Shakers lived communally, practiced celibacy, and developed distinctive furniture design and musical traditions. Shaker communities thrived for decades, growing through conversion and adoption since members didn't reproduce. Their furniture and architecture were beautiful in their simplicity. Their agricultural practices were innovative. They filed numerous patents for inventions, but celibacy ensured eventual decline. By the late 20th century, only a handful of Shakers remained. The last active community has just 2 members as of recent years. The Shakers demonstrated that a movement based on complete sexual renunciation could persist for generations if it provided enough meaning and community to offset the sacrifice. Members weren't miserable. By many accounts, Shaker communities were joyful places where labor was valued and creativity encouraged. The decision to remain celibate was understood as liberating rather than oppressive, freeing people from family obligations to focus on spiritual development. The Oneida community took the opposite approach, practicing complex marriage where every man was married to every woman in the community. John Humphrey Noyes, the founder, taught that possessive romantic love was sinful, that true Christians should love all equally. Complex marriage was meant to eliminate jealousy and ownership. In practice, the system involved significant control. Noyes decided which members could have sexual relationships when. Young people were paired with older members for initiation. Reproduction was regulated through male continence, a technique where men avoided orgasm. Later, Noyes instituted a eugenics program, stirpiculture, where he selected which members could parent children together. The community operated successfully for decades, supporting itself through manufacturing. But the sexual arrangements attracted intense criticism from surrounding communities. When Noyes fled to Canada to avoid arrest, the community collapsed. It reorganized as a joint stock company making silverware. Oneida flatware is still manufactured today, though few buyers know its origins. What both the Shakers and Oneida demonstrate is that communities can organize around radically different sexual arrangements if they provide clear structure and meaning. Humans are adaptable. The specific arrangement matters less than whether it's clearly defined and supports the community's functioning. Problems arise when rules are unclear or when leaders exploit their position. The Mormons faced intense persecution in their early decades, driven from multiple states before settling in Utah. Their practice of polygamy, which wasn't publicly acknowledged until 1852, made them targets. But the opposition went beyond polygamy. The Mormons were building a separate society with its own government, economy and militia. They weren't just a church, they were a potential state within a state. Brigham Young ruled Utah Territory as both religious and civil authority. The theocracy was explicit. Church law was civil law, dissent was punished, critics disappeared. The Mountain Meadows Massacre in 1857, where Mormon militia killed a wagon train of Arkansas immigrants, showed how far the community would go to protect itself. Federal pressure eventually forced accommodation. Utah's admission as a state required abandoning polygamy officially. The church complied reluctantly, though some members continued the practice secretly. Over time, the Mormon Church integrated into mainstream American life while maintaining distinctive beliefs and strong community structure. The evolution from persecuted cult to respected church took over a century and required substantial changes in practice and presentation. But core identity persisted. Mormons still see themselves as a chosen people with unique revelation. The temple ceremonies remain secret. The structure of authority is hierarchical and patriarchal. In some ways, Mormonism retained cult-like characteristics, even as it gained social acceptance. The Jehovah's Witnesses followed a similar path from marginal sect to established religion, though without the geographic concentration Mormons achieved. Founded in the 1870s by Charles Taze Russell, the movement predicted Christ's invisible return in 1914 and the imminent establishment of God's kingdom on earth. When visible apocalypse didn't occur in 1914, or 1918, or 1925, or 1975, or any other predicted date, the theology was adjusted. The invisible return was reinterpreted. The timeline was recalculated. True believers accepted the revisions and continued. The movement grew despite failed prophecies, which seems paradoxical but demonstrates the power of community and commitment. Jehovah's Witnesses practice strict separation from worldly society. They don't vote, serve in military, celebrate holidays, or accept blood transfusions. Members who violate rules face disfellowshipping, where other witnesses must shun them completely. This includes family members. The threat of losing all social connections keeps members compliant. Former witnesses describe the organization as cult-like, citing information control, demanding loyalty and harsh punishment for dissent. Active witnesses see themselves as maintaining biblical truth in a corrupt world. Both perspectives reflect genuine experiences. The organization does provide strong community and clear purpose. It also controls members through fear and isolation. The Branch Davidians evolved from Seventh-day Adventism, which itself arose from disappointed followers of William Miller's 1844 prophecy. Miller had calculated that Christ would return that year. When it didn't happen, most followers dispersed. Some reinterpreted the prophecy and formed the Adventist movement. Splinter groups kept forming, each claiming to understand the true timeline of end-times events. David Koresh was simply the latest in a long line of Adventist-influenced prophets claiming special insight into apocalyptic timetables. What made his group different was the willingness to arm themselves and resist government authority by force. The Waco tragedy might have been avoided with different tactics, but conflict was probably inevitable given Koresh's apocalyptic worldview and his community's isolation. The government's handling of both Waco and Ruby Ridge, where federal agents killed a woman and child during a standoff with a survivalist family in 1992, fueled anti-government movements for decades. The events became proof that the government would use lethal force against religious believers and political dissidents. Militia movements grew, conspiracy theories spread. The Oklahoma City bombing was explicitly retaliation for Waco. This demonstrates how cult incidents affect broader society beyond the immediate participants. The Branch Davidians numbered under 100 people, but their deaths influenced millions, shaping political movements and inspiring terrorism. Cults don't exist in isolation. They're part of larger cultural conversations about authority, freedom, and belief. The Solar Temple murders deaths in Switzerland and Canada in 1994 combined New Age beliefs with Knights Templar mythology. The Order of the Solar Temple taught that members were reincarnated Templars preparing for transition to a new spiritual level. Leaders Luc Jouret and Joseph Di Mambro convinced followers that ritual departure from physical form would transport them to Sirius. 53 people died in coordinated incidents at Solar Temple properties. Some were clearly murdered, including a 3-month-old child considered the Antichrist by the leaders. Others apparently participated willingly in group departure rituals. 16 more died in similar circumstances in 1995, and 5 more in 1997. The deaths were staged elaborately, with bodies arranged in symbolic patterns. The Solar Temple was wealthy, attracting professionals and business owners. Members tithed substantial portions of their income. The organization owned multiple properties and operated legally in several countries. From outside, it appeared to be an esoteric study group. Inside, the leaders were preparing for cosmic transit through coordinated death. What makes the Solar Temple particularly disturbing is the mixture of murder and self-harm. Some people, including children, were clearly killed against their will. Others chose death, convinced by the leaders' promises of spiritual transformation. Distinguishing between victims and participants is complicated. Even those who participated had been manipulated through years of indoctrination. Can you consent to your own death when your reality has been systematically distorted? Japan produced another deadly cult when Aum Shinrikyo released sarin gas in the Tokyo subway. The group's evolution from meditation center to terrorist organization took just a decade. Shoko Asahara founded Aum in 1984, teaching a synthesis of Buddhism, Hinduism, and apocalyptic prophecy. Early on, the group seemed harmless, offering yoga and meditation classes, but Asahara began preaching that enemies surrounded the group, that supernatural forces opposed their mission, that drastic action was necessary. The scientists and engineers who joined for spiritual practice were redirected to weapons development. The group manufactured rifles, explosives, and chemical weapons in compounds disguised as legitimate businesses. Before the subway attack, Aum had already engaged in violence. They murdered a lawyer investigating the group and his family. They released sarin in Matsumoto, killing 8 people. They attempted to assassinate critics with VX nerve agent. The subway attack was the culmination of escalating aggression, not an isolated incident. Aum recruited from Japan's elite universities, attracting brilliant students who should have been capable of critical thinking. How did educated people end up manufacturing nerve gas for a cult? The process was gradual. Initial practices seemed beneficial. Progressive commitments made backing out difficult. Social isolation from non-members eliminated reality checking. Small moral compromises prepared people for larger ones. The scientists who made sarin probably didn't set out to commit mass murder. They were told the weapons were defensive, that enemies threatened the group, that protecting the community justified extreme measures. Each step seemed reasonable in context. By the time they were producing lethal chemical weapons, they'd been conditioned to accept the group's reality completely. The Heaven's Gate members who peacefully ended their lives in 1997 had undergone similar progression. Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles recruited followers in the 1970s, with claims they were extraterrestrial beings in human form, preparing a crew for departure from Earth. The teaching was bizarre, but initial commitment was low. Attend meetings, study the material, see if it resonated. Over time, commitment escalated. Members left jobs and families to live communally. They accepted increasingly strict rules about behaviour, dress, and speech. Many underwent medical procedures to reduce sexual characteristics. By the time Applewhite announced the departure date, members had spent decades preparing. The final step, drinking poison, seemed like natural culmination. The group's final videos are eerie in their calmness. Members explain their decision matter-of-factly, appearing rational and at peace. They truly believed they were leaving damaged containers behind to join their teacher on the spacecraft. The conviction is complete. No doubt shows in their faces. This is what total indoctrination looks like. Comparing Heaven's Gate to Jonestown is instructive. Both ended in mass death under charismatic leaders, but Jonestown involved coercion and panic, children forcibly poisoned, people shot trying to escape. Heaven's Gate appears entirely voluntary, adults making informed choices based on their beliefs. Yet both demonstrate how totalistic belief systems can lead to accepting death as preferable to continuing in the physical world. The UFO religions that emerged in the mid-20th century combined science fiction imagery with spiritual seeking. The alien movement, founded by French journalist Claude Vorilhon in 1974, teaches that life on Earth was created by extraterrestrials called Elohim through genetic engineering. Vorilhon, renamed Rael, claims he met an Elohim who explained humanity's origins and asked him to build an embassy for their return. Raelians practice free love, considering sexual pleasure a gift to be enjoyed without guilt. They promote human cloning as the path to immortality. In 2002, a Raelian-linked company claimed to have created the first human clone, though no evidence was provided. The movement's combination of sexual liberation, transhumanism, and space aliens appeals to a specific demographic seeking spiritual meaning outside traditional religion. Whether anyone in the Raelian leadership actually believes the Elohim story is unclear. It might be sincere conviction, elaborate performance art, or conscious fraud. The distinction matters less than understanding why thousands of members find the narrative meaningful. It provides cosmic significance for human existence, explains religious history scientifically, and promises technological transcendence of death. That's appealing packaging. Scientology similarly wrapped spiritual claims in scientific-sounding language. L. Ron Hubbard presented Dianetics as applied religious philosophy, using terms like engram, reactive mind, and analytical mind that sounded technical. The E-meter, a device measuring galvanic skin response, gave sessions a scientific appearance despite having no actual diagnostic value. The space opera elements of Scientology's advanced teachings would be laughable if they weren't taken seriously by thousands of committed members. Xenu, the galactic dictator who brought billions of beings to Earth 75 million years ago and destroyed them with hydrogen bombs, creating the spiritual parasites that plague humans today, this sounds like rejected science fiction. It essentially is. Hubbard was a science fiction writer. But members who reach operating thetan level 3, after years of study and tens of thousands of dollars invested, generally accept the Xenu story. By that point, they've been conditioned to trust Hubbard's authority absolutely. The organization's structure ensures members are deeply committed before encountering the strangest teachings. Cognitive dissonance and sunk cost fallacy make rejection difficult. The Church of Scientology's aggressive response to criticism distinguishes it from most religious organizations. Operation Snow White, executed in the 1970s, involved Scientologists infiltrating government offices, stealing documents, and planting surveillance equipment. The goal was to purge negative information about Scientology and Hubbard from official records. It remains the largest infiltration of the US government by a private organization. 11 high-ranking Scientologists, including Hubbard's wife, were convicted and imprisoned. Hubbard himself was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. The organization survived, but Operation Snow White demonstrated the lengths it would go to protect itself. Later tactics included extensive litigation against critics, hiring private investigators to harass former members, and conducting smear campaigns against journalists who reported negatively. This institutional aggression set Scientology apart. Most cults collapse when faced with serious legal challenges or media exposure. Scientology has the resources to fight back, using courts and investigators as weapons. The organization's tax-exempt religious status in the United States, granted in 1993 after decades of conflict with the IRS, provides both legitimacy and financial advantages. The question of whether Scientology is a religion, or a cult, or a business doesn't have a simple answer. It functions as all three simultaneously. It provides religious meaning for sincere believers. It exhibits cult-like control over members. It generates substantial revenue through course fees and operates profit-making enterprises. The categories aren't mutually exclusive. Moving through the later 20th century, cults began incorporating therapeutic language and self-help frameworks. Large group awareness training programs like YEST, founded by Werner Erhard in 1971, used intense marathon sessions to break down participants' psychological defenses and rebuild them around the program's philosophy. EST seminars lasted entire weekends with minimal breaks, creating exhaustion and emotional vulnerability. Participants were confronted aggressively, told their problems stemmed from how they'd constructed their reality. That transformation required surrendering their stories and accepting EST's framework. Thousands of people attended EST trainings, reporting profound breakthroughs. Critics described it as psychological abuse that produced temporary highs, followed by crashes requiring more training. EST evolved into landmark education, still operating today with softer presentation but similar structure. Whether these programs are beneficial self-help or cult-like manipulation depends partly on individual experience. Some participants genuinely benefit from the perspective shifts. Others experience psychological harm. The line between challenging therapy and abusive indoctrination isn't always clear. NXIVM represented the next evolution of this model, combining self-help training with multi-level marketing structure and, secretly, a master-slave cult. Keith Raniere positioned himself as one of the smartest humans alive, with IQ in the genius range. His rational inquiry curriculum promised to overcome psychological limitations through logic and reason. The public-facing NXIVM seemed legitimate. It attracted successful professionals, including actresses and business executives. Courses cost thousands of dollars, but delivered what felt like valuable insights. Participants reported breakthroughs in confidence and relationships. The organization had professional marketing and corporate structure. But inside the executive success programs, Raniere's inner circle control mechanisms were more intense. Members were expected to follow strict diets, severely limiting calories. Women were ordered to maintain unhealthily low body weights to meet Raniere's preferences. The secret DOS sorority required collateral before admission, then used that collateral to coerce compliance with increasingly demanding and degrading requirements. The branding ceremony, where women were held down and burned with a cauterizing pen while others filmed it, demonstrated how far the group had progressed from self-help workshops. The brand incorporated Raniere's initials, literally marking women as his property. The procedure was excruciatingly painful, done without anesthetic, designed to demonstrate absolute loyalty. When one DOS member went public in 2017, the organization unraveled quickly. Federal investigators built cases for racketeering, forced labor, and other charges. Raniere fled to Mexico, but was arrested and extradited. His trial in 2019 revealed the extent of manipulation and abuse. He was sentenced to 120 years. Several co-conspirators received prison sentences. NXIVM's story is recent enough that its full implications are still being processed. It showed how cults can hide in plain sight using legitimate business structures. It demonstrated that education and professional success don't protect against manipulation. It revealed how gradual escalation of commitment can lead people to accept situations they would have rejected immediately if presented all at once. The gradual escalation is crucial to understanding how cults capture otherwise intelligent, capable people. No one joins a cult. People join what seems like a beneficial group, then are slowly drawn deeper through incremental commitments. Each step seems reasonable in context. By the time the situation is clearly abusive, members are too invested to leave easily. This pattern appears across historical and contemporary cults. The Cathars didn't start by telling people to starve themselves. They began with beautiful theology about spirit versus matter. The practices became more extreme gradually. Jim Jones didn't immediately demand mass death. He spent years building authority through staged miracles and progressive isolation. The process is always gradual. Understanding this helps explain why people don't just leave when things get strange. By that point, they've invested years, given money, cut ties with outsiders, based their identity on membership. Leaving means admitting all that was wasted. It means facing the world alone after burning bridges with family and friends. It means reconstructing identity from scratch. That's genuinely difficult, requiring enormous courage. Former cult members deserve compassion rather than judgment. They're not stupid or weak. They were caught in systems specifically designed to exploit human psychology. Recovery is possible but challenging. Many former members struggle with trust, guilt, and identity issues for years. Support groups and specialized therapy help, but the process is slow. The cult recovery community has developed frameworks for healing. Understanding the manipulation techniques helps former members recognize they were victims of a system, not personal failures. Connecting with others who've had similar experiences reduces isolation. Gradual reintegration into mainstream society allows people to develop identities outside cult frameworks. Some former members become anti-cult activists, using their experience to educate others. Stephen Hassan, a former Mooney-turned-cult expert, developed the BITE model: behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. These 4 categories help identify high-control groups. The more strongly a group exhibits these characteristics, the more cult-like it's functioning. The BITE model is useful but not definitive. Some legitimate organizations might score moderately on these dimensions without being cults. Military training involves substantial behavior and information control but serves necessary societal functions. Traditional monastic communities control members' lives extensively but don't generally trap people. Context and degree matter. What distinguishes cults from other high-demand organizations is usually deception and exploitation. Cults lie about their true nature during recruitment. They promise benefits they don't deliver. They exploit members financially, sexually, or through labor. They make leaving unnecessarily difficult through threats and manipulation. Organizations that are transparent about expectations and respect members' right to leave aren't typically considered cults, regardless of how demanding they are. This brings us back to ancient mystery cults. Were they cults in the negative sense? They were certainly secretive and exclusive. They required initiations and oaths of silence. But they generally didn't deceive recruits about their nature. Initiates knew they were joining mystery religions with secret rites. The groups didn't typically exploit members beyond normal religious expectations of offerings and participation. The Eleusinian mysteries functioned for nearly 2 millennia, without apparent scandals or mass harm. Whatever happened in the Telesterion during initiation, people generally seemed grateful for the experience. The mysteries didn't break up families or demand total devotion. Initiates returned to normal life after the ceremonies. This suggests the cult provided what it promised: a profound experience that changed participants' relationship with death and existence. If you found this journey through hidden history valuable, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what surprised you, what resonated, what questions remain. And if you'd like more long-form explorations of fascinating topics, subscribe so you don't miss future documentaries. Until next time, rest well with the knowledge that mystery doesn't require surrendering to those who claim to have solved it. The greatest wisdom might be in accepting that some things remain unknowable, while continuing to seek understanding anyway.